really focused on kind of a lunch hour here such that we can really explain a little bit about the 4 stages of AI maturity. So super excited to be welcoming everybody into the Executive Lunch and Learn. Really today is meant to be an introductory to how we're viewing AI, as we're all probably feeling AI is moving at breakneck speed. Things are changing constantly, and yet a couple things are really kind of staying the same in terms of how we think about it as leaders and executives. And so want to really walk through that today. Just a couple of housekeeping items as we get started. Today is going to be a 45-minute presentation. So I know focusing in on the lunch hour, we've got about 45 minutes of content. We may get through it just slightly quicker than that. We do want to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end, because I know a lot of folks probably have some questions around AI and how it applies to their business. Would encourage everybody in the audience to participate in asking those questions throughout the session. So feel free to post them into the question box within the interface. So those will submit those questions. We'll then kind of go through that list at the end. And for anybody that's joining today, or even those that signed up that weren't able to attend, you will be receiving the content along with the link to watch the recording. So excited to have everybody here today. And so what are we going to cover? I want to dig in a little bit deeper into the agenda and kind of all the different ways that we're seeing AI. And so we really want to go through those 4 stages of maturity. So we're going to start with the challenge, kind of, how do you go from the basics of AI, using it to ask and get answers, into actually driving business impact? We're then going to touch on really the risk of inaction and how we're seeing companies that maybe aren't so willing to dip their toes and jump right in. What risks does that create and what challenges are likely there? And then we want to really go through kind of the 3 main stages: personal productivity, team-based workflows, and then even going so far as to talk about what does an AI native organization look like, and what's the journey from where you are today to actually reaching that pinnacle of leveraging AI. So before we jump in too much into the content and kind of where we're going, would love to get a gauge of everybody in the room. And actually before that, we probably should introduce who we are here and all that kind of stuff before we get into our poll sessions. But just to give some introductions, I'm Jordan Berry. I'm the general manager of the Activated Intelligence Division. Really focus on helping clients set the vision with data analytics AI, and then really building towards that future. So from both a pragmatic and practical sense, how do we leverage modern technology to really change and transform how we operate as a business? And I'm joined here today by Tony Berry, same last name, our father. So I'll pass it to you to share your introduction.
No problem. Thanks, Jordan. So as Jordan mentioned, we're excited to meet. I'm Tony Berry. I'm Director of Business Development for the same division, the Activated Intelligence Division. And we love to think, eat, and breathe AI. So looking forward to the discussion and encourage everybody to ask questions today. But a topic that is obviously in the news every day, every hour, it seems like. So look forward to it today.
Awesome. So now that you know who we are and why we're talking about this, let's jump in and learn a little bit about the audience. So we're going to start with 2 polls today. So you should be seeing the poll interface pop up on your screen. And the first question is a very simple one, but where do you think you are with AI today? And so, kind of the way we might think about it is, are you experimenting individually? Are you starting to pilot AI as a team? Are you really now starting to scale it across your organization? Or maybe you haven't even really gotten started. You've been kind of watching and seeing what's happening in the market and thinking about where to go next. So let's give this just a little bit of time to answer these questions. Then we'll come back and share the results with everybody. Awesome. So it looks like we just closed that out. Kind of a mix. So we've got experimenting individually, piloting with a team, both leading at 40%, along with scaling at 20%. So we've got a few that are really kind of pushing the organizational side. And at least in this audience, no one is not doing anything. So that's interesting to hear. So it seems like AI is really pervasive in terms of the market, which is great. And so let's now shift it just from kind of that point of view to your organization. Are they investing in AI? And kind of the way we think about this is at the lowest level, are they investing in tools like Microsoft Copilot or other enterprise grade tools? And not only are they investing, but kind of in what capacity? Are they investing for individuals as requested, kind of powering those super users? Are they starting to give departments access to these tools? Have they gone ahead and rolled it out to the whole company? Or maybe they're thinking about it, but haven't actually made those investments yet. They're still leveraging kind of the kind of normal. And then, of course, if you're not sure, we can help guide you there as well.
Very
So
interesting.
again, give this a few moments to let everybody submit their results. Awesome. And this one's a dead heat. We've got 20
That's pretty cool.
awards. So we've got individuals, departments, entire companies, and those that haven't even made the investment yet. So perfect. We've got a broad audience today. So hopefully everybody will be able to take away something as we talk through the AI maturity journey and what that looks like. Awesome. So as we understand kind of where we are today, the fact that, different people are at different stages in their journey, we did want to talk about what does that broad journey look like from kind of the early stages all the way to really that pinnacle of an AI native organization. And so today's really meant to be an introductory session. We're going to cover each of these phases, kind of what do they mean? What are the things that you should be thinking about as an executive and leader in your organization? But we're not going to dig into the depth of detail. So those will be some further sessions that we'll do later on. So each of these stages has a lot of detail and nuance. Those will be coming soon, but happy to have some sidebars with people if they really self-identify with certain things to talk through this. But let me kind of tee up, why this is important and really what the challenge that we see is in terms of the market and what organizations are dealing with. When you look at kind of the spectrum of AI, what are the types of things that it can do? How can we engage with it? Most people kind of start in the simple range naturally, really focusing on what's called retrieval. And so this is what everybody probably knows as, the ChatGPTs or Copilots of the world. It's really kind of my Google replacement. I want to be able to ask questions and get answers. And it can really ask questions. You can ask questions in a general sense, kind of what's the world knowledge that we're tapping into. And there's some work in terms of actually giving it access to your data as a business and being able to answer questions in that regard. The big challenge that we're seeing right now is over the last year or so, folks have really made strides in terms of giving AI context and letting it answer questions. But now we're faced with this challenge of how do we actually move from retrieval to actually task delegation? And so that's really the big shift of, rather than just using it as a tool in our daily workflow, how do we actually start to delegate work to AI and to AI agents so that we can free up our people to really focus on the things that matter for our organizations, the things that are very humanistic and very impactful. And so as you make the transition from retrieval to task, and we'll talk about this quite a bit today, there's a lot of things that have to be done at the organizational level to really take advantage of all of that. And kind of the idea is that we're moving towards more of an autonomous, always-on type operating system. Most organizations operate in that traditional 9 to 5 world, but you may have customers that want to engage with you outside of normal business operating hours. How can we start to leverage this new technology that's always on, always available, to really change how we operate, change how we personalize, change how we service the customer? And so really that's the challenge that we're seeing is as you climb each of these rungs, how do you make sure that your people, your teams, and your organization are really ready for each of those transitions, both from a security and from a strategic lens as well? And kind of why would you make that journey, right? Why would you go through those different rungs? Why would you take the time to invest at each of those stages? And here's kind of the path that I want to share. And these are the different patterns that we're seeing out in the world in terms of how you interact with agents. And we'll talk a bit about today how these really kind of map to the maturity stages as well. But most of us are probably in this current phase where we're engaging with AI almost as if it's our personal assistant, right? Where we're able to ask questions, get answers, schedule things, all the kind of basic drudgery that we have to get through our day so we can do the real work that actually drives what we do. As you start to really leverage AI and agents, the pattern shifts. It's no longer a one-to-one pattern. The people are actually now all getting promoted to managers, and you're managing agents along with the people in your organization. And so how do we, think about agents not only as this assistant, but actually these digital colleagues that can take on that work? And that's really that challenge of going from ask and answer to task. But the big thing that I want to highlight is there's been a big study by IDC and Microsoft has been a part of it. The core belief is that there's going to be north of 1 billion agents in the workforce by 2028. So we're only, less than 18 months away from a world in which we have 100 times as many agents as we do people in our businesses. And so you really have to prepare yourself for that future where we are much more in an orchestration role, where we set the direction, we guide how we want these agents to work. but then allowing the agents to really drive our business forward. And so that's something that we should all be mindful of as we move forward is, as we introduce agent one, two, three, all the way north to a billion, how do you really think about that future and prepare today for that inevitable so that you don't get kind of caught in a challenge, later on. And so how should we be thinking about this as executives as well? And one of the phrases that we really like and that we resonate quite a bit with is this idea of the frontier and how as organizations are really shifting the way they work from what I'll call kind of the manual human powered approach to now kind of human led and agentic powered. How should we be thinking about this? How do we navigate the frontier in our own industries and our own space? And really kind of the four ways that navigating the frontier can help you is in these different pillars. And so we can really think about it as, how can we leverage AI to enrich our employee experiences? Again, the simplest version here is what are all those drudgery, time waster type things that we could free our team up so they could focus on things that give them a lot of energy, give them a lot of focus and ability to impact the organization. Secondarily, how do we reinvent the customer experience? We can now think about each individual customer and their individualized needs, personalization to what their wants and desires are. And so how can we really take this from kind of a one size fits all approach to now truly tailoring it and customizing it for each and every one of our customers? How can we think about ourselves as kind of always evolving organizations? How do we make our processes more efficient, more effective? Thinking about all those stage gates and approvals and human in the loop type elements. With AI, we can now tackle what used to be edge cases are much more addressable and able to be accomplished and automated through AI. And the fourth one is probably the challenge of the day for this group as executives is how can you think about your space, your business, what is uniquely yours that you do in the market different and better than anybody else? That's really what we talk about when we're mentioning bending the curve on innovation. How do you amplify what you do well so that you can do it better than anybody else, that you can drive more market share, that you can impact the customer in better ways? And so these are really going to be some pervasive themes throughout the day. And so if you think about 2 years from now, a billion agents in the workforce, many of those are working for your organization. How are they, accomplishing these four different pillars in a way that really drives dramatic change and impact for what you're trying to do. But before we get to that future, I did want to pass off to Tony of, well, what is it like today? And what is it at that very early stage of the AI journey? What does that look like and how should we be thinking about it?
Yeah, so we'll start first. First, it's great to see that everybody is starting to use and experiment with AI. So that's, a year ago, we would have found half the audience hadn't started, but everybody has. So that's great. What we want to talk about today, like Jordan mentioned, is you're going to have, 100-fold number of agents to actual humans in the future. And so one of the things that we talk about a lot is you've got to think of this as more than just technology. It really involves people and process and change. And so not taking action and really starting to think about this as a corporate asset does create some business risks. It's very easy for somebody to download one of the agents today and start, quote, playing with it. And so what happens there, one of the risks that occurs with that is something that's called shadow AI. And almost every organization we talk to has this where somebody has pulled down Copilot or ChatGPT or some of the new Claude models, and they start using it and they start putting business data into it. And so sensitive data sometimes ends up in AI prompts. We had a customer recently that put their financials up in a free agent. Well, that got shared because obviously that data is available. And so you want to be really careful with that concept of shadow AI. You often have tools in the organization that you may not even know about that are being used. And one of the things that's starting to occur now is these agents or co-pilots, ChatGPT, et cetera, can connect to other systems through a concept called plugin. And you may have data going into systems or out of systems that you didn't anticipate or manage. So shadow AI is a real risk that's occurring in businesses today. The other thing is Jordan mentioned, you start to get this idea of a human working with multiple agents. And an agent does what it's told. that doesn't mean that it did what you meant. So you've got to get really good at how do you do the instructions and skills that an agent needs. Also, you may have data now that's being shared with an agent that you don't want exposed outside the company or to another agent. So you got to start to think of these just like you would a person from a security and a permission standpoint. And so that's also something that needs to be considered is what are the permissions? What do I want to allow this agent to do or not to do? We often use the analogy, think of this as either a new hire, junior resource or an intern. What would you want them to be able to do and not able to do? So you really have to think about that identity of the agent, the security associated with it. And bad actors have access to the same tools. So one of the things that we'll see a lot of, and it's getting quite prevalent, is this idea of AI powered phishing. It can be because it's AI and it's able to generate very compelling content and images. It generally is better at phishing in some cases than humans are. You see a lot of in the news today where credentials are being stolen because AI can doesn't sleep, doesn't stop. It can look and crawl through a lot of data to try and find those credentials. And AI tools are the new entry point for security attacks. So it's the new surface area. So inaction, not having a plan, not thinking through it does create business risk, but also there's the great reward that Jordan talked about. So it's something that you really have to consider. And we call this stage zero. It's kind of starting with the basic from a planning standpoint. And if you could advance, we'll talk about it. And then the other piece that's part of this, the challenges that occur with AI, the thing that doesn't change is AI is only as good as the data that you put it on top of. So the same, garbage in, garbage out occurs. And what we find in organizations today is data lives in a lot of different places. Might be in your CRM, your ERP, your marketing, your website, the plethora of Excel spreadsheets and documents that are out there. So you do want to take a look early on is how are we going to unify that data and bring it together. Also, we often find in organization definitions may vary. What's revenue? What's a lead? What's an order? What's an invoice? You want to make sure all those things, those definitions are really sound. Often this idea of a glossary comes up when you're using AI. And AI, regardless of the hype from the vendors, it can't reason well over raw data. You can't just point it at data and expect it to figure everything out. It needs to be trained, it needs to be instructed. And then finally, governance is really important. Start early, think about it often. How do we manage it? We've probably all heard the concept of hallucinations. How do we make sure that AI is giving us answers that are, well grounded and well informed and trustworthy? But all is not lost. There is a great way of a progression, and that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of this. Is again tremendous power and capability comes from AI. And the great news is, it's, again, everybody here sounds like they're already starting to use it and you're starting in the right place. But we talk about kind of three stages as you move through this. And it's very similar to the phases that Jordan showed earlier. So typically what we suggest as an organization is start with that individual value. We can probably all set and think about the things that just take up a lot of time that it would be great to hand off or at least have an agent assist us. And this is that first diagram that Jordan showed, this human plus assistant. So how can I start to take advantage of this never sleeping, always on, always available assistant that I can tap into? And so a lot of times what we say here is look at what are those just day in the life use cases? And there's some great prompt galleries out there that we'll share. What are the things that I could ask an assistant to do? Give me a summary from my week. Tell me, what's the policy on this? Can you prep this PowerPoint for me? Can you pull together the agenda for the meeting, or excuse me, the minutes from the meeting that I missed yesterday? These are the things that the individual agent is quite good for. We'll then talk about functional value, and then we'll go into org value as kind of the next stage. But let's dig into stage one first. And so stage one is really building those foundational skills. So you want to start with, the tool of choice. We are biased towards the Microsoft 365 Copilot, but you want to start to just build the skills across your organization. We're going to talk about work IQ in just a second in the next slide, but that's the intelligence layer. This is the idea of emails, meetings, notes, et cetera, all organized. But then you also want to start thinking about, what's the agentic work? What do I want AI to do for me in the flow of work that will turn that intent into action? And there's some great examples that will point you to that kind of talk you through the thousands of use cases that have already been identified where AI can become a really, beneficial individual tool. One of the things that we like about the Microsoft 365 platform is it's what's called multi-model, which means you can pick the best model for every task that you want, whether that's the ChatGPT models, the Claude models from Anthropic, the Grok from um, um, several other organizations, but there's over, I think, 13,000 models that are available today. So you can really pick the best one for each of the tasks, and the tools are even getting really good at even auto selecting for you. And a lot of things that's in the press right now is the fact that what's really important is the platform that you're managing these agents with. And think back to that billion agents. If you've got 100 agents as an individual that are assisting you, you want to make sure you've got a platform that manages that securely, allows you to monitor the use. And so it really becomes this idea of I want a platform that allows me to manage and optimize the agents that are available to me. And then the key piece, as we discussed already, is security and management. It's really important. Think of these as true digital workers with all the things you would do if you were hiring an employee. What's their identity? What's their access? How do I turn them on or off? So those are building those foundational skills and really getting that plan and that understood. So then you can move on to the great ROI that's available. And this is what we think is one of the big game changers with the Microsoft Copilot system. So as we mentioned, the data coming in and that being organized and understood is really important. AI is not able to discern things just by looking over the raw data. So one of the things that Microsoft has done, which we think is quite smart, because most organizations are already using the Microsoft 365 platform. So they're using Outlook, they're using Teams, they're using PowerPoint, Excel documents. They've got possibly some SharePoint components to it. So all the data that's out in the organization becomes the context for these individual agents that you're going to build. And one of the really interesting things is Microsoft has gone a little further in terms of not just looking at this as emails or a PowerPoint or a Word document, but the context associated with it. Great examples. Let's say you have an active project where you've got a team working on it. It has deadlines, it has decisions. That isn't contained in one place. It's contained in a lot of different artifacts associated with that. And what Microsoft has done with Work IQ is the understanding of what is that project and what are the artifacts that it essentially is disseminated into. And so they understand the concept, or Work IQ understands the concept of a project. Ooh, that's over here in this email, that's in this schedule, that's in this document, and that's in this PowerPoint. And so it can pull that data back in the context of the questions that you're asking for. And then you can go even further and you can start to give this skills, so capabilities to do certain things. Prepare a PowerPoint with this template, schedule these meetings for these individuals. So it can start to do things that, again, understand the context of the business and all the massive amounts of data that are available to it. So that can become a real game changer as you start to look at these individual productivity capabilities. And one of the ways to really start on this is this is a hands-on exercise. It is an experiment. You want to start using the tools. It's really this concept of try it. If it provides benefit, continue to do it. If it doesn't, but this is some great content we're going to share. But here's kind of the 10 simple things that Microsoft suggests you do as you start to work with Copilot. I don't know about you, but every one of these would provide me benefit on a day-to-day basis, from recapping a meeting to sending an email, summarizing a document. I like number 6, which is give me some ideas. It's very good at this. You share some of the things that you're doing. I'm not great at writing, so I love having it help me create documents. Really good at exercising Excel. And probably the one, number 10, as we all go global, is help me write this in Spanish or translate the French so that I can understand it. So it's really, really good. So 10 simple use cases, a lot more, but you can start to experiment with this using the built-in capabilities that are already there through Work IQ. So that's the individual piece. And a lot of benefit will come from that with just the time wasters that Jordan described earlier. But now let's go to the next level. And what we find often in organizations, and I think several you were already saying that you're starting to do some of the team-based benefits. This can become a really big unlock. This is where Jordan showed you is now I'm a human with multiple agents doing work for me. And what we really want to concentrate on here, and we call this kind of stage 2, are what are those big unlocks now at the team or the functional level? And we can probably all think of several things that would be very beneficial. And Jordan, if you roll forward, I'll give a couple examples here. But these tend to go down functional areas, so HR, marketing, operations, IT, sales, finance, et cetera. So as you start to think of things from a team standpoint, that's where these agents can become true digital coworkers. We have a couple clients that have built things like, I want an inventory agent because I need to understand inventory that's available in a certain system or capability. I need some help preparing a sales proposal. Teams may be collaborating on some new pricing or a new product they want to take to market. You can now start to build agents that become just a member of the team and that will assist you with some of that capability. So there's a great scenario library that we use a lot for this, where Microsoft's taken the time through all of their hundreds of millions of users, where they've gotten some detail back in each of those use cases. So we'll share that link. Great place to go if you're looking for some ideation around each of your functional areas. But this can become a really big unlock that starts to let the team see some benefits. And it's more than just time wasters here. It's truly functional benefit to the organization that can often improve some of your key metrics.
Thanks, Tony. I
And
think
then
that was
I'm gonna let
really.
Jordan go to the next level, which is the real big fun one, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Just to comment that I know Tony really walked us through the individual value, how we can all personally get productivity out of the AI. Now, as a team, how we can work together around our core workflows and processes. And what I really wanted to touch on today was really now at that org level, what are those additional unlocks that we can have? And probably the big thing here is you may have heard the concept of becoming AI enabled. And I would argue any organization that's really ascending these two realms is becoming AI enabled. The transition from AI enabled to now AI native is really that next pivotal shift, and that's where we're not only adopting and using AI, we're actually adapting our organization around AI, and so I think that's the biggest change. And what's really interesting, and we'll talk about this in a moment, it's much more than technology. It's how do we as an organization understand how do we need to restructure the way in which we do work, the way in which we're organized, the way we automate our processes. It becomes much more of a holistic exercise. But the goal is that you're getting to a place where you're now having those autonomous agents as part of your organizational values. So this could be interacting with teams, but it also may be things that are just happening in the background, kind of consistently, pushing our organization forward. And probably it's focused on our industry or our space. What are some of those things that are unique challenges to our industry, that we can leverage this kind of holistic point of view around AI to really drive new heights and kind of new levels of impact for us. And so probably the big thing I wanted to touch on today, and we're introducing this more as a concept and something to consider, is that you really need to think about your IQ layer. So what Microsoft and what Tony covered earlier is what's called work IQ. That's kind of the general understanding of your business, right? What are the projects? What are the deadlines? What are the decisions? But everybody that uses Microsoft has access to that same IQ layer, right? What is your uniqueness? What is your IQ? How are your team members or employees working together? This comes back to kind of culture and core values. How do we decision? How do we decide what we do and don't do? How do we decide what good and bad is? All of those types of things are unique to your organization. What are your kind of core processes and how do you operate maybe different than your competitors or other people in the space? How do we make sure that agents have access to that knowledge, and as they're interacting with us, they're creating assets and artifacts as well, and so that becomes part of your IQ layer. And then how do we connect this with the real world? How do we really connect into the right places for information and knowledge? It's very easy to leverage the general web, but one of the things we found is for anybody that's in a niche industry or something small, general advice doesn't always apply to a
Mhm.
specific problem. And so how do you really hone in on what types of information we want to pull? And so the reason I bring this up is because it takes a bit of planning and foresight. One of the big things with AI is that we're all making these decisions, this kind of what I'll call tribal knowledge or kind of just core understanding. A lot of that is probably invisible today. And so how do we start to think about how can we capture all of those decisions, those approvals, and not only what happened, but why we did it? That really sets the stage for kind of a future in which you have a lot of value beyond your capital investments. And so when you think about kind of building a tech stack around this, it's more than just one tool. And so this is the Microsoft viewpoint. But if you think about kind of all the different tools that are available to you, you may start with something like M365 Copilot, which we've talked a lot about today. But then you can also get into some of the more advanced tools like Copilot Studio, GitHub Copilot, the data agents that are available in Fabric. Microsoft Foundry is really Microsoft's premier platform for hosting these models and more advanced agent capabilities. And this is all cloud-based, right? Even if you have on-prem servers or data systems, being able to leverage the scale and capabilities of the cloud is something that should definitely be considered in an agentic world. But ultimately, you need to be able to manage and monitor them. So looking at new tools like Agent 365 that help you really govern and manage these agents would definitely challenge you as leaders to think about not just the simple licenses, but actually what's the agentic stack that we're building as an organization, and how can we leverage that. And kind of so what, right? It sounds nice that the organization can start to capture some of this information. The reason that we're so bullish on this is that we think that AI is a unique investment class. So rather than traditional software investments or things of that nature where you get kind of incremental value over time, we believe that AI investments compound, which is a very unique concept when it comes to capital investments and operating expenses. And so what we want to talk about is this idea of owned intelligence, which is that IQ layer. It's that institutional know-how. And because we are capturing it and using that to power AI, it then creates this flywheel effect where we're able to really hone in on how we do things, and that flywheel really amplifies what we do. So if you are in a competitive race with others in your space, if you're trying to beat out competitors, if you're trying to drive a moat, if you're trying to be the top go-to for your customers, we think this is the big driver of change in the near future. And so as leaders, again, thinking about this early can really help you set up for that compounding effect later on. And so at the bottom, we've got just a couple of verbs here, but one of the things as you're ascending that pyramid and moving towards more of the org level impact, you really have to think about re-architecting your workflows, not simply kind of slapping AI on top to automate what's in place today. How do we re-architect what we do to do it well? You then want to really think about how can agents execute this, not just once, but in repetition across the organization. How do we capture all of those signals that we talked about, the decisions, the policies, the good versus the bad, and then by encoding that back into our knowledge base, our kind of corpus of knowledge, that is really what sets the foundation for this compounding effect. So, something to consider. This is definitely, we're seeing the bleeding edge organizations are starting to recognize this and capture it. But as good partners, want to bring this concept forward to you today. And so we hit you with a lot. That was a lot of information. Go from the early stages all the way to that pinnacle of becoming truly AI native. And we really see this journey as one in which confidence is the key driver. So how can you get confident around each of these tools, building that stack, capturing that owned intelligence? And so we would really encourage everybody here today, like Tony mentioned, there's risks with inaction, there's risks with action, but we believe that the value of moving forward really outweighs the value of staying in place. And so, don't just deploy AI tools. Don't think about just buying licenses and calling it a day. Really think about incorporating AI into that foundation that's going to empower you as a leader and as an organization to really scale, not only securely, but through that AI amplification that we've talked about quite a bit. So as good partners, we're here to help you with that. So if you've identified yourself in any of those stages, happy to speak with you. And in that regard, we did want to offer that if you are, chomping at the bit to get started or dig into this a little bit further, we are offering a free AI strategy briefing. So this is a chance for us to meet one-on-one, a chance to just really go through those stages and talk about your organization. Where are you? What types of things are really resonating with you today? We'll kind of understand your maturity, talk about your goals. And then, one of the tangible outcomes is, what is the next step? Are you at stage 0 looking to go to 1 to 2? We'll give you some very clear guidance on where to go next. And Tony, I don't know if you want to add comment here on kind of the types of impact we're seeing with companies as we go through this process. But
yeah, it's a no easy button here, right? Jordan mentioned, but what we are finding is those that start on the journey, that there's just tremendous capabilities and benefits, with this once in a lifetime capability that we're seeing with some of these AI capabilities. So strongly encourage the conversation. We would love to brainstorm. That's the really fun part about this, is there a lot of ideation, a lot of understanding the secret sauce of your business and how to actually apply that in a way that we joke, but you get these agents that, they don't sleep, they don't need to be fed, they don't take vacations. So it is a way of really, amplifying your business through this concept of enabling through AI. So we encourage everybody to take the right next step, whatever that may be.
So with that, we'd love to open it up to questions, see if anybody has any particular items. We will check the chat window here and see if anybody has posted anything. But now is a good time if you do have any questions to pop them in the chat. I'm happy to answer those as well. And probably one question, maybe to you, Tony, that would be helpful is, when you're thinking about Copilot versus Claude versus ChatGPT and all these different tools, where do you see that really matters? Does it matter? Is it at that personal productivity level? Is it at the company level? Just kind of curious your thoughts there.
Yeah, so it's great. And so, kind of two things that we see, and we admit this, we are Microsoft biased, but really you probably can't go wrong with using any of the agent capabilities that are out there, whether it's from Microsoft or ChatGPT or Claude, from Anthropic. But the key difference is you start to get into that team element is really where we start to see the differentiation. And it starts with that work IQ, just the fact that you've got that knowledge of your business in a way that's secure and already governed is probably the big difference of the two. And then the second piece is what we see with Microsoft. We mentioned you have access to all of that. So we probably all seen is who has the best LLM, and I swear it changes daily. So, 2 weeks ago it was the new Fable 5, I think it is, from Claude, and this week it's the Soul from ChatGPT, and then one of the open source ones comes in from China, which has its own ramifications from that standpoint. So with the Copilot setup, you don't have to worry about that. You can focus on how do I solve my business problems, how do I keep it secure, versus who has the best LLM, because that's going to change constantly and it's just accelerating. So I don't know if that answered it exactly, but if there's any other questions related to that, just let us know.
Awesome. All right, we got a couple others that we can answer, so maybe I can take one and you can comment as well. But one of the questions is, looks like Work IQ is positioned different than some sort of standalone chat experience. What do people usually get wrong when they first switch from something like ChatGPT to Copilot? And that's a fantastic question. Thanks for putting that out there. I think the big difference from my point of view is that you may have seen kind of memory and that idea. When you're working with chat, each agent has memory. And so as the individual starts to get to know you and your preferences and things like that, this is really a similar concept at the team and company level. So now not only is it personalized to you, it's actually personalized to your team, to your company. And one of the things that's unique is we see this a lot is, hey, I might use my personal login to these tools to generate a document, but the agent doesn't have any context to, well, where are we in that project? What's the next step? What was the discussion that happened in a Teams call last week? And so you often get kind of these wacky documents, right, where it hallucinates a lot, it pulls information from the web. When you're really trying to make sure that it's tailored to your organization, that's where WorkIQ is the big differentiator. And Microsoft has actually positioned it as a separate product. So you can tap into WorkIQ through an API, through other tools. So it really is kind of an independent asset that gets bolted onto your Copilot license. So again, if you haven't tried it, definitely would recommend taking a look and seeing that, because we think it's a bit of the game changer. Pretty much only Microsoft and Google can do this at the moment. So and that's given their 20 years of personal productivity suite, investment that they've made. And so I think, looking at both of them as a uniquely positioned to help with that is something to consider as well. Awesome. Some people said that all their questions were answered as well. So that means that they did a half decent job in explaining that, which is good. And then maybe one more question, just kind of to you, Tony, is that scenario library that we touched on. A lot of folks say we want to get started, but it's too
Yeah.
much. There's too many scenarios, too many use cases. How should they think about kind of prioritizing those things? Where should they go first?
Yeah, so and we'll forward the link, but the scenario library is great, and there's not just Microsoft, but others have it out there too. But it is this idea of, what have other people learned, and it's a really great place to ideate. So you can go up. We just did this recently for a client. the industry they were in, we looked up, and then we asked, well, what does the marketing team typically, get concerned about in this industry? And it came back with about 10 examples, and none of them were exactly the right fit, but it started that ideation. And that's, I think Jordan mentioned this early on. We really encourage this with AIs. Ideate a lot. We all probably have about 20 things that we think AI could help us with. Get those written down, and then start to prioritize on where you think the big benefit would be. But that's where the scenario libraries are really, really helpful. And so we encourage people to use them and then tailor it to your specific use case needs. And it's back to English school for all of us, right? We have to get much better now at, Jordan talked about that, institutional, knowledge that we need to start building, and kind of the things we didn't think about always writing down. We just did it. Well, now you have to think about writing those down, capturing them, because we are bringing in essentially this, agent that doesn't have any knowledge of our business, doesn't understand, our SOPs and the ways we do things. We all have to get much better now at documenting and writing the way our processes and our unique capabilities. And the scenario library will help you, because it is kind of a typical structure that you want to do as you write these use cases up for an agent. And Jordan, I had one, it looks like there's another one that just came in that maybe it's your turn to answer, is on, how we showed all I think it was that slide where you had all the technologies and the components, is, you know, how does one go about figuring out whether I have, something that I can use, just standard Copilot, or do I need Copilot Studio, or do I need Foundry? How do I make those decisions on how best to go about building these agents?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and one that we didn't cover in depth today, but we often talk about this spectrum of what are called no-code agents, which is where you can just use agents to build agents, kind of natural language, kind of no code involved, just pointing and clicking. You've got low-code agents, which is a little bit more technical. Kind of think about it as your old workflow type tools where you can configure them, and then at the far end you've got true pro code, which is writing code to build these agents. And that's what a lot of the software vendors have done, is actually built their own agent that bolts into their particular platform. One of the big things that we talk about is, okay, when you're thinking about those use cases, what's the minimal level of complexity that you need to get that agent functional and valuable? And so we often recommend start with the no code, start with the low code, kind of understand, can you accomplish what you need to with that? Because they're going to be easier to build, easier to maintain, they're less costly in the long run. And then only when you see that you really need those more advanced capabilities should you think about more of a pro code type solution. And just one concept that brought up as well is, we're really talking about kind of enterprise AI that can see the whole company, that can access data from each of your operational tools. We are seeing a lot of confusion in the market because every software vendor is launching their AI platform. And while they may be fantastic tools for the users of that particular platform, just like siloed software, siloed agents are definitely a challenge, right? If they can't see the whole picture, it can be really challenging. And so that's the other thing to consider as well, is when you're thinking about AI, these software vendors have great AI add-ons that can make the members and users of those tools better. But as executive leaders, how can you think about that holistic AI strategy for the company as well? So yeah, thanks, Tony. I probably expanded a little beyond the question, but I thought those were important
Those are
topics
great comments.
well. So, well, with that, I think we're at the 45-minute mark. So I wanted to keep this right in line with the timing for today. So really all we've got left is just to thank everybody for joining us today. Hopefully there was some valuable content there, picked up a couple nuggets. And like we mentioned, feel free to take advantage of that free AI strategy consultation. Happy to meet with anybody and kind of talk through your personal use cases. But appreciate you being here today, and we will see everybody here soon.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Look forward to the conversations.